What's up guys, Lifting here. So with CI and low life being super meta at the moment due to their large effective health pool and regeneration, I thought to myself, how can I make a life based build that to some extent mimics some of those benefits, but is also going to be strong against the Guardians, Atziri, Uber-Isaro, and potentially even the Shaper. My thoughts fell on Righteous Fire. As with this type of build, you typically end up with a fairly high health pool, allowing you to deal with many of those rippy one-shot mechanics, and I also thought that due to the very high life regen of the build, many of the hectic Guardian fights should end up feeling somewhat easier. Luckily, this turned out to be true. I've so far tested the build up against the most notorious tier 15 map bosses, including Derezo, Comb, Core Malachi, and all of the tier 16 Guardians. All of the kills were done deathless and without wasting a single portal. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. When I started this character, I was somewhat worried that the damage of the build would be somewhat lacking during endgame, and while I will freely admit that Righteous Fire will never have tier 1 clear speed due to the nature of the skill, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that once I had gained enough levels and fully utilized Elemental Equilibrium and Elemental Overload together with Curse on Hit and Flammability, the damage was actually pretty good. It was even so good that I decided to only use Conc effect against bosses, and I instead just focused purely on having a large area of effect of the Righteous Fire for anything else, even in tier 15 and tier 16 maps. And it should be noted of course that by having a large area of effect you are indirectly dealing more damage with your Righteous Fire, as the monsters get hit earlier by your Righteous Fire radius and stay within the burn effect for longer when you move ahead. Now the cool thing about Righteous Fire is that the damage of it scales with your character's maximum life. This means that the more maximum life your character has, the more damage your Righteous Fire will burn for. So to effectively scale this, I simply picked up as many efficient life nodes in the skill tree as I could, together with a few jewel sockets where you can further add life and things such as area of fire damage. I also bought myself a nice Comb's Heart. That said, if you want to play this build on a budget, and you really can, it's very cheap to get going, you can instead just buy a Belly of the Beast, which is completely fine as well. Other than that, I of course made sure to stack as much flat health as possible on my remaining gear. And to maximize my area of effect of Righteous Fire, I also bought myself an Intuitive Leap Jewel and placed it here by the Scion. This allows me to grab 10% extra area of effect and the Skittering Runes notable for more curse effectiveness, meaning more damage and more survivability. Now the biggest downside of this type of build is that you can't start using Righteous Fire until level 65, where you can get your Rise of the Phoenix shield and you can equip a leveled Purity of Fire and Vitality. Until then, you will have to level as something else. I personally equipped 2 Axiom Perpetuum Sceptres, a Gold Rim, a pair of Wanderlust, and decided on using Firestorm as my main skill. This setup will carry you all the way to 65, however it does start to fall off sometime around level 50, which makes reaching the last 15 levels a bit of a chore. I'd also suggest that you spec into some cast speed, elemental or spell damage nodes while using this setup to make it more efficient and enjoyable, and then of course spec out of it later once you start using Righteous Fire. Once you reach level 65, you need to equip your Rise of the Phoenix shield, a level 17 Purity of Fire and Vitality aura, and of course have all of the life regen nodes picked up as suggested in the skill tree, including at least 4, maybe even 6 of the regen points from your Chieftain Ascendancy class. Depending on your maximum amount of life, this will hopefully grant you around 400 to 500 life regeneration per second and allow you to sustain the degen of Righteous Fire. If so, you can now start to use it as your main skill. It will feel somewhat decent in the beginning, but it is really the type of build that gains so much per level, and it will feel so much better later on. Oh, and also make sure to use the Stone Golem for the additional life regen it provides. Once you unlock enough life regeneration from your Ascendancy points, you can take out Vitality and instead start to use the Blasphemy Enfeeble setup for a nice defensive bonus. Another important thing to note is that you should try to avoid Energy Shield as much as possible on your gear, as it will increase the amount you burn for. You can't entirely avoid it because of Rise of the Phoenix, but just try to minimize it as much as possible. If you're still degenerating after having done all that, it is simply because your total life pool is too small. Having a high total life pool also increases your life regeneration. This is what your life regen percentage is based off. So the more life, the more regen. At my character's current level, I have about 1200 life regeneration per second unbuffed. Buffed, it goes all the way up to 2000, making it a very powerful and effective defense. Also remember that endurance charges for this type of build is very important, as it not only increases your character's physical damage reduction and resistances, it also greatly increases your life regeneration while these are being active, due to your Chieftain Ascendancy, but also the Comb's Way ring that I suggest you equip. Another thing that's very important to understand is the flask setup for this type of build. For this type of character, I suggest that you run one Seething Divine Life Flask of Dousing. This is your panic flask. You use this to turn off the Righteous Fire degen and to rapidly regen life. To heal, normally you will otherwise need one Ruby Flask or two if you prefer. The Ruby Flask will greatly increase your maximum fire resistance for a short duration, thus decreasing the amount of damage Righteous Fire deals to your character, which makes you regen life much more effectively. Besides that, I recommend a Stepnite, Basalt, and a Rumi's Concoction. If you can't afford the Rumi's, a Granite Flask of Iron Skin will make do until then. There's no need for a Quicksilver Flask since you'll be using Shield Charge to move around. Again, it's very important that you understand that your Ruby Flask serves as your healing flask. The Seething Life Flask is only for panic situations or for when you want to turn off Righteous Fire. Overall, I'm very happy with how this build turned out. I'm pretty sure you can kill Shaper with it as well if that is something you want to try, as long as your gear and levels are good enough, of course. So if you can overcome the leveling process, or if you have the discipline to do that, then try out the build. The only thing I will say though is that if you're a new player to the game, then this might not be the best build for you, as the mechanics of Righteous Fire and how to sustain it can be a bit complicated. So keep that in mind before you decide on whether or not this is the right type of build for you. If you're interested in the build guide details, check them out in the description of the video. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?